Thank you for joining me this morning. Today we're going to be in Matthew chapter 6. We're going to do verses 27 to 30. I put a suggested memory verse on here, Matthew 14:31. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? When this is over at the end, I have some review questions for you when you're done, just for fun. And again, thank you for joining me this morning. Today we're starting in Matthew 6, verse 27. And it says, which of you, by adding thought, can add 1 cubit unto his stature? And I was looking at that, taking thought. You know, he's talking about worry, fear, or anxiety. He doesn't want us to fear. And, we think, what does the Bible say about fear? Well, in Isaiah 41:10, he says, fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee. I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. God doesn't want us to be afraid. God's right there. It says right here that he's going to strengthen us. He's going to help us. And then we go to We go to 2 Timothy 1:7, and it says, for God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind. He doesn't want us to fear. God gives us a sound mind. Now we go to Joshua. Joshua 1:9. Have not I commanded thee, be strong and of a good courage, be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee whithersoever thou goest. So we don't have to be afraid, because this right here says that God is always with us. No matter where we are, no matter where we go, God is right there with us. And again in Proverbs, the fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe. So we just need to have faith in God. We just need to trust God. God doesn't want us to fear. He doesn't want us to be afraid. He wants us to trust him. Worry doesn't accomplish anything. All worry does is hold us back. These verses are encouraging us to keep our trust in God. No good thing comes from worrying. You think of Peter. The angel had to come wake him up. He wasn't worrying. He trusted in God. And this verse right here, verse 27, which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit unto his stature? Worrying doesn't make us taller. These are showing us that our thoughts are powerful. We talked about our words are powerful. Well, our thoughts matter too. And it says 1 cubit. The cubit is basically the length of your arm. If you get your arm and look at your arm, look at your elbow to the tip of your middle finger, it's about 18 inches, but that's about how they measure a cubit. This says, which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit unto his stature? Our stature is something that only God can do. Only God can change that. We need to keep our mind on the Creator, on God. Worrying doesn't accomplish anything. It holds us back. This verse is encouraging us, to keep our trust in God. And then we go to verse 28. Verse 28 says, and why take ye thought for raiment? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. Now I was looking at that word raiment. Raiment is your clothes, the things you put on. Clothes are important. They keep us warm. They serve a purpose. What people wore in Scripture revealed their status, their purpose. People's spiritual condition was judged based on the clothes that they wore. The high priest, they had certain clothes that they wore. They had intricate garments complete with precious stones and gold, and it symbolized their sacred role and closeness to God. You know, if you wore sackcloth, it represented that you were in mourning. It represented grief. Um, Certain clothes that people wore represented poverty. They could tell that they were poor. The rich men wore certain clothes. The priests wore certain clothes. People were judged by their clothes. You think of the prodigal son. The first thing the father did when the prodigal son came home, you know what he did? He put a robe on him. He changed his clothes. So clothes in the Bible were significant. God isn't telling us not to wear clothes. He tells us to wear clean clothes. It's okay to have nice clothes. Just remember who gave us the clothes. This word right here, it says, why, back at verse number 28, and why take ye thought of raiment? And the next word is consider. Consider means to study, to pay close attention to, think carefully about. And it says, consider the lilies. The lilies represent purity and innocence. Lilies are believed to have an anti-inflammatory and antibacterial effects. It can be used to treat skin conditions and respiratory ailments. It was once considered a royal flower. Many kinds of lilies are harmful to cats. The tiger lily is edible. That means you can eat it. Lilies are pretty. They come in various colors. And how beneficial, how pretty they are. It says, consider how they grow. They toil not. Toil means they don't do any hard physical labor. They don't work. And it says, neither do they spin. Spinning was an activity, primarily the work of women. It was essential for producing clothes and textiles, which were vital for daily life and trade. They would spin things to make thread and fabric. You don't spin lilies. And then we go to verse number 29. Verse number 29 says, and yet I say unto you, that even Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these. The word Solomon means peace. We know Solomon, when he first became king, God appeared to him in a dream and told him he could ask for anything. And, Solomon could have asked for anything, but what did he ask for? He asked for wisdom. So God gave him wisdom, but he also gave him the things he didn't ask for. He also gave him great wealth. He built the temple that David wanted to build, David his father, and he overlaid it with pure gold. Solomon was the richest and most magnificent king of Israel. But even Solomon was not arrayed as one of these lilies. Even Solomon's clothes were not as pretty or as beautiful as the lilies. God planted the lilies. God waters the lilies. God takes care of the lilies. God makes them grow. Then we go to verse 30. Wherefore, if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? And I was looking at that word clothe. Wherefore, if God so clothe. Clothe means to provide something to wear, to dress, to protect from the weather. If God so clothe the grass of the field, God's taking care of the grass. He's protecting the grass. You think of the grass. Some facts about grass. There are more than 12,000 species of grass. Grass is a plant, so they go through photosynthesis. That grass is green. Green is the best color for photosynthesis. Grass covers 40.5% of the earth. Grass is food for many animals. It grows. But grass is different. It grows from the bottom up. So when animals eat it, it doesn't destroy it because it grows from the bottom. Some say, one definition of grass is weeds. The thing about weeds is weeds grow on their own. They're not always pretty. Sometimes they get out of control. Sometimes they choke your crops. But the benefit of grass and weeds is they're plants. They go through photosynthesis. They produce oxygen in the air. They exhale oxygen. Some have medicinal value. One of the most hated weeds is the dandelion. Dandelions are edible. They help your liver. They help your body cleanse out toxin. Weeds and grass hide small animals from predators. They improve the structure of the soil. The roots help hold the soil together. They act as a cover to shield the soil. If you remember, or if you've learned in history, in the 1930s, there was a drought. And the drought, caused everything to be dry. And then we had what you call the Dust Bowl. It was, the drought was followed by strong winds. This blew all the topsoil off the fields. And a newspaper reporter, he was reporting it and he called it the Dust Bowl, and that title just stuck. And the wind, the dust that blew, it caused this type of pneumonia known as the brown plague, which killed hundreds. And there was little grass and vegetation because of the drought, so the wind was able to blow away the topsoil. Without the topsoil, crops cannot grow. And most people, a lot of people fled to California, not everybody, but a good majority of them. But anyways, talking about the grass is important because without that grass, there was nothing to hold that topsoil there, and it just blew everywhere, and it created, then we really had a drought. We really had a problem. But here it says, wherefore, if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is cast into the oven. And when I think of that, cast into the oven, that can mean different things. To me, it means that, grass is subject to the elements. If it's cold, the grass is cold. If it's hot, the grass is hot. Whatever, the grass is just yields to the temperatures. But God provides for the grass. He waters it with dew every morning. God makes it grow. God even cares about the seeds. God even cares about the grass. And if God can take care of the grass, he can take care of you. This shows us that God is able to take care of us. We go to 2 Peter 5:7. It says, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. Okay, now at the end of verse 30, it says, O ye of little faith. And I was thinking of that word little. Little means a small amount. Little does not mean zero. A lot of times we read that, O ye of little faith, and we think they didn't have any faith. But little doesn't mean zero. Little means a small amount. But they had some. That phrase, O ye of little faith, Jesus is the only one that I can find that ever said that. And it seems to me that every time he said it, he was talking to the disciples. We go to Matthew 8, starting at verse 25. They're on this ship, and there's this huge storm. And the disciples, they came to him, being Jesus, and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. Just a second here. Lord, save us, we perish. Apparently I messed up. And he saith unto them, why are ye so fearful, O ye of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. You know, he didn't say they didn't have any faith. He said they had little faith. You know, there's a difference there. And then we go to Matthew 14:28. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come unto thee on the water. You know, Jesus was walking on the water. And Peter says, Lord, let me do that too. And he said, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Of course, we know while he was walking on the water, he saw the wind boisterous, and he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And you think, how much faith did he have? He had little faith. You know, Jesus doesn't say they had no faith, because we know from reading Hebrews that without faith we can't please God. Without faith we can't do anything. It says they had little faith. With little faith, Peter walked on the water. You know, Jesus sent them 2 by 2, and they raised the dead. The devils were subject unto them. You know, they performed miracles. The Bible says we just need the faith as a mustard seed. Look at what a little faith can do. Okay, now, my suggested memory verse is Matthew 14:31. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? Now I have a suggested memory verse, or I have a Bible trivia for you if you would like to answer these questions, and comment in the answers how you did. Thank you so much for joining me today.